so much. I love you so much. I love you so much. I love you so much.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. And after years of exploring the awe-inspiring truth of the ultimate nature of reality on the show, I'm super excited to announce that we are now casting a wider net with the new late-night style consciousness elevating talk show called Optimistic, which is going to feature none other than you, the listeners. Once your own awakening has begun to bloom and you realize that everyone is an extension of you and that everywhere you go, you're there waiting for yourself, you quickly realize the only game in town is to help wake up our sleeping brothers and sisters. And that is exactly what Optimistic is designed to do. To take this show from reaching thousands of people every day to a next level video production that can ultimately reach millions. So if you've already felt the call to etch your name in eternity as a soul who played an important role in propelling the wave of awakening that's just really beginning to sweep our planet at this crucial time in the evolution of our planet, I'm asking you to answer the call to join me in co-creating Optimistic. There are multiple exciting ways you can co-create this experience with me and the rest of the Optimistic family that are all outlined on our new webpage, optimistic.tv. Check it out, choose the option that is in the highest alignment with you, and together we can propel a wave of awakening that will create a positive ripple of impact that reverberates in our lives and the lives of others, which will ultimately help deliver the world into the heaven on earth planet of paradise it's destined to become. Get in the game, folks, and please join me at optimistic.tv so you have your own hero's tale to tell yours or someone's great-grandchildren about one day. Also, before we jump into today's episode, I'd like to take about a minute and a half to tell you about a few sponsors that not only help to make it possible to produce this show 5 days a week, but that I'm also genuinely passionate about promoting. The first longtime stellar supporter of the show that I want to mention is Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online with over 8,000 video titles. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. The second sponsor I'm sincerely passionate about promoting is Purium. It's no mystery that bringing your mind, body, and spirit into balance is necessary if a person truly intends to manifest the greatest and grandest version of themselves. So if you've been looking for a way to easily get organic superfoods into your system every day with a simple plan that can help you reestablish a healthier foundation and relationship with food, like I was doing before I found Purium, I highly recommend going to positivehead.com/transformation and checking out the videos and interviews there where I dive deeply into discussions explaining why I take these products every day. And should you ultimately end up on iShopPurium.com to purchase any of their 50 plus amazing superfood products, be sure to use the code POSITIVEHEAD, all one word, for a 25% discount. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share episode, I'm super excited to have Jason Estes here with me on the show. And instead of summarizing what he does like I typically do with my Soul Share guest, I'm just going to read something that he wrote so he can essentially describe it himself. Jason says, "I am the fountain, patient and kind. I wait for any to stop that are thirsty for truth. The wisdom I hold is unconditional. The place I sit is humble. I am here for all, and I wait for you with fresh wisdom that flows and isn't hindered or held. I am tapped into the source of all of truth and creation. Come and drink and remember who you are. Jason, welcome to the show, my friend. Love the poetic words there.
Yeah,
so
I loved
cool.
that intro. It was really nice.
Yeah, I loved it too. That was a cool little twist on my normal intro, and I am going to be predictable with my opening question, and
Absolutely.
That is this. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
My passion is assisting the world to remember who they are and doing that through example.
I like that. Well, we're going to dive into what exactly that means. And before we do, maybe you could just give us a little glimpse into your backstory. I always like to have some context for, who we're talking to and where they've come from. And I know the audience would appreciate that as well.
Awesome. Well, I've been teaching for about 20 years, and I've just been kind of living my life as best I can, following my fate and continuing to enhance and grow. With the main story is that anything and everything that is in the world is perfect, exactly as it is. The only thing that is not perfect is me, until someone else tells me otherwise. So living that way has helped me tremendously, because when nothing's coming my way, then I know that it's me that needs to be worked on. And that has helped me to never need to advertise or anything of that nature, and to always stay busy and to continue to help the world grow and other people to remember who they are.
I love that. When you start, it's sort of that perspective of treating everyone as if they're God in drag, and, you've been sent nothing but angels, and they're all, if you start viewing everyone as a master that's there to sort of help you sharpen your own axe, so to speak, I think that is such a deep and profound wisdom, and such a powerful way to navigate one's life from.
Thank you. Yeah, that, and I also do daily practices every day to continue to improve on who I am. Right now, I'm up to about 8 hours of daily work, different meditations and things that I've written for myself. Yeah.
Wow. That's a lot of daily work, my friend.
Well, I used to work 16 to 21-hour days every day for the last 3 years. So with that amount of hours, it works out really well, because you stay very clear. And you're able to really assist and get through things much faster with people, because you're holding that frequency and resonance for whatever they're trying to solve. And as long as you stay really clear, it's really easy.
Right.
But I didn't get there from the beginning. I started out with 5 minutes, and then I just continued to add more every day until 20 years later, here I am.
Wow. That's pretty epic. I mean, what kind of personal work are you doing during those 8 hours?
Crunches, push-ups, things like that for the physical plane, but I do it on multiple planes at once. So when I'm doing crunches, I'm also energetically overlaying those crunches, so that I'm getting the virtual and the physical plane at the same time, to allow a very fast movement forward and a lot more balance and stability. Not only that, but it also keeps my body in the best condition and my mind in the best condition.
I've heard a lot of interesting things on the show. I think this is the first time I've heard of astral crunches. That's pretty awesome.
More like virtual crunches, because astral means the misunderstood.
Okay.
Yeah, right. That's one thing that's very interesting about what's going on right now. Actually, you just segued into one of the greatest things to talk about, the celestial and astral cities, and the process that we've been in, which we call the infinite game. Or the greater game, depending on your perspective. So
I'd love to hear more about it.
So you have the celestial, right? And you have this whole beginning point of the world and where it all started. And in that process, then you have density and physicality, right? So the etherics and then the density and the physicality. What happened was, as the etherics became physical, they forgot what they remembered and who they were. In that process of forgetting what they remembered and who they were, led to them being things they weren't. But in that process of being things they weren't, they began to understand and exercise their free will into finding who they actually were again. And that's what we call the infinite game. A being that is in its space of mastery from a space without free will, that enters into a free will verse and begins the journey of reaching mastery in free will, using the valor and integrity they learned by having no free will. And that kind of creates our consciousness where we know what's right and what's wrong for us. And then when we come here, though, we forget those things.
Right.
So that process of forgetting and all the things that are created along the way that aren't in alignment with who we actually are is what creates the astral plane, or the semi-physical plane, as a lot of people call it. So you have this cloud of misunderstandings that it's created, right? But it's strong enough in the physical understanding that it actually stabilizes. And so then you have a plane that you can build on top of so people can come down faster and remember more. But at the same time, they're coming down with confusion and chaos because they don't fully understand a concept, because the plane is built on misunderstandings in its translations.
Very, very interesting. So, what, from your perspective, let me ask you this. Did you start sort of getting perceptions into some of these insights and information like recently? This is something you said you've been doing this kind of work for 20 years. I mean, how do you receive information essentially? What is your primary source?
The clearer I get, the more that I know. And it's really fascinating how that works, because when you know something, it doesn't mean that you understand it. So a lot of people will say, yeah, I know that, but they don't actually understand it. So what they're doing is they're dismissing reality by using a knowing instead of an understanding. The knowing is one of the greatest tools that we have. I call it like another sense or another sight, so to speak, right? But it's not the same thing as understanding, because understanding is actual wisdom, whereas knowing is kind of like a knowledge from something beyond.
Right.
And wisdom is the key to everything, which is why, that intro that you said, the wisdom I hold is unconditional, and it's fresh and it flows and isn't hindered or held. That means like I'm part of a stream of consciousness that doesn't hold on to things. So when I know something, it doesn't become a fixed idea and stop me later on. One thing that I like to tell people is, if you are crossing a ravine and you build this entire bridge, right? Because you're the first one there, no one else is there, so you kind of stop and you have to start building it. You cross over that bridge. Do you then pick up that bridge and take it with you so that no one else can cross that ravine?
Right, that'd be pretty silly.
You would also not be able to move a few feet at all. Like the bridge would weigh you down and you would crush yourself. So why do we do that with wisdom? Why do we do that with beliefs? Why do we do that with what we call facts? And we do that because we're conditioned to do that. We do that because we're afraid that in the next moment we might need that tool or that technique and it won't actually be there. So then we start weighing ourselves down with all this content that we don't need, and it begins to make our wisdom stagnant. And then other people can't really resonate with it because it's not connected to us and who we are. It might have been connected to us 10 years ago, but it isn't who we are. So what I've found is this technology, these awakening things that have helped me tremendously are amazing. They're wonderful, but they continually evolve. So every day I let go of it. I just go, hey, I don't need this. So here it is. I'm emptying myself fully and completely. Every game I've ever created, I uncreate completely, claim all my power and value points back from it. And I surrender my power and value points to my divinity to create the perfect games for me. And then I step into the day and I see what the perfect game for me looks like.
Gotcha. So it's sort of, in a sense, a blank slate each day with your approach to navigating your experience.
Exactly. And what I found is the tool that I knew yesterday, if it comes back up to use today, is always a little bit more enhanced. There's a little bit more knowing to change into understanding. Otherwise, I don't get met with an experience anymore that brings up a certain tool because whatever it is, I've mastered.
Right.
And that's a really cool feeling, because then all of a sudden you are your greatest tool instead of carrying a toolbox of other people's tools.
Right. Yeah. Very, very cool. So I'd be very curious to hear sort of your maybe a further explanation. You mentioned like this infinite game, celestial game, greater game, sort of how you break those down into. I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, we call this density shifts. So coming into the higher density is important because when you go up higher, you're able to remember more and things are faster. The cool part
Right.
is, if you think about it, you have this space, what I call the God realm, where everything began, at least as best we can understand. Then you have the first celestial city. And this is like where the grand alchemists, the people that design kind of like the architects of the universe, exist. Then you have the next city, which I call the second celestial city. And this is a place where the grand alchemists teach others how to be grand alchemists. So they're people that have achieved a great level of clarity and they're able to be themselves very clearly. The only difference is they haven't yet reached that state of grand alchemy, which I feel like I'll go over that after I explain this.
Okay.
Then you have the third celestial city. And the third celestial city are the people that are training with the alchemists to become the best alchemists they can be so that they can eventually move up. Because it's all a progression system. And this is why I call it the infinite game, because each one of these can take trillions of lifetimes to exist and to go through, and lots of training that we can't even fathom in our own minds.
Right.
And then you have the next city, which is what we call the celestial astral bridge. This is the very first city where astral or misunderstood energies start to come into play. These are people that are pure service beings. They don't realize that alchemy is actually stronger than service because they haven't understood alchemy yet. So they're not using that as a framework or a concept yet, right? And
How
then
do you define
have,
alchemy? I'm sorry to interrupt it. Just to get, could you give us your explanation of that?
It's taking something and transmuting it into something else. And in this
that's what I assumed you
case,
meant. I just want to make sure. Make sure that's
no
what
worries.
you were implying.
Feel free to interrupt me anytime. It's important that whatever I'm sharing is understood on both sides. I like to go back and usually explain the three types, but that was totally fine. So then you have the next one, which is the very first of the astral cities. And this is a place where service is being born, but it's so confused that it understands service from suffering perspective. So it's not a place where you can say, okay, well, I'm a pure service being, everything's great. It's a pure service being that's kind of like a combat medic. It's necessary, but it's a very dangerous space of service. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah.
Like a lot of the monks used to live in that level of service where they would give away their entire life, become martyrs for a cause. And that was the very first of the misunderstood cities. Then you have the next one, which is the astral city, and this one is pure suffering. This is the only way that I can understand life is to suffer through it. And in that, I begin to kind of understand how to help others suffer less. Right?
Right.
And then you have the very last astral city. And the very last astral city is pure suffering. The only way I can ever grow as who I am is to go and to suffer. Because the world is in suffering, and therefore I need to go and suffer. There's no hope of moving forward. So now that I've explained that, this is kind of important because I'm going to explain it from another angle. And this is the density shifts that have taken place in our lifetime. So in 1987, the very last of those astral cities that I talked about disappeared. What that means is the beings that started incarnating onto this planet were no longer incarnating from that city, which meant that now every bit of suffering led to some form of wisdom that led to service. So it changed the world.
Gotcha. So you're saying like the sort of most severe levels of suffering incarnating from that city essentially was no more.
It was no longer a necessary gain. It doesn't mean that it didn't exist. So the beings that still existed on the planet were still the ones that were perpetuating suffering, right? Because they didn't know any better.
Right.
It's not like when a city disappears, the entire planet is immediately forgiven of all karma related to that city and everything it's taken on.
Right.
So that led to this confusion and chaos spiking really high because all these beings that came in 1987 are these high-level beings, and they're trying to understand why no one else gets them. Right. They're like, hey, you don't need to suffer. Like, we actually can be of service. We can change things. I've done it. I understand. And then they're like, no, you need to do this exact thing this way. And eventually, over time, enough suffering happens that person forgets of what's up there.
Right.
And if you look at this is a really interesting time in our history because this is when opinions in the media became more valuable than fact as we progressed from the 1987 to the 2000s. We went from
Right.
a fact-based society to an opinion-based society.
Right.
And that was how they counteracted that. That light that was coming in needed to be balanced in something else. And so the TV and media groups and movies and everything else began to pretend to be facts.
Right.
And it led us to this really unique situation. But eventually we were able to overcome the next level. And in 2008, the suffering contracts altogether ended. This is what we call the war for consciousness on the earth. It was one of the hardest times from 1987 to 2008 for any spiritual beings that were on the planet. They were in something called spiritual war, whether they knew it or not, because the war for humanity was going on. And when I say humanity, I mean the remembrance of the human design. And whether or not this one side or the other side won, and again, I don't consider either of them evil or dark or light or whatever. They're just simply two sides that were pulling at one thing.
Right.
Until that happened and that achievement happened where one side won, the fate of humanity was pretty much a dice roll. And once it did happen in 2008, everything changed because suffering as a need disappeared. So all children born after 2008 no longer needed to suffer. Their contracts related to suffering were no longer necessary. Now, if they, as spiritual beings, still had karmic value that needed to work through, they could come down for suffering. But even that changed eventually. So then in 2015, we had the very last astral city removed. And this is a huge win for humanity because no longer were children coming in with misunderstandings. They were coming in with a whole new way of looking and approaching. After 2015, the children that came in were very clear, concise beings. They understood what they needed to understand. And even the lineage density, which is the karma of the mother and the father coming together to create the child, wasn't enough to dissuade them. So this massive movement started happening. We gained all this momentum. And then last year, November 21st, 2018, the very last astral bastion began to shift. And then on February 18th, we actually changed that. This year, February 18th, the last astral city, and it was the bridge between the two, is now gone. Which leads us to, we are now a fifth density planet. We are in a place where we are at the very lowest level of the celestial. We are sitting in alchemy as a planet, which means we don't need to suffer. We don't need to be of service. All we have left to do is take what is here and to transmute it into something greater. And that's what we call the infinite game from a greater game perspective, because we're here in the physical plane looking up at the celestial planes, whereas the infinite game is the celestial planes looking down at the earth. Because from the celestial planes, time doesn't exist, right? So it's like, well, this is the mission, go down, you'll eventually complete it, you'll come back up.
Right.
That process changed everything. And that's one of the reasons we're ascending into a fifth dimensional race. The planet's already 5D. Like it did that in October of 2017 on the 28th. The entire planet shifted, everything changed. But now where we are right now is we are transitioning into a race of beings that are capable of handling the fifth dimension. And what's really fun is a lot of people have no clue what the fifth dimension is because it's the most misunderstood concept, because up until November 21st, no one could really explain it because there was too much astral currents related to the fifth dimension, which means mistranslated ideas or misunderstood ideas. So the easiest way to explain the fifth dimension for me, the way I explain it, is in the third dimension, you're in pain and you have tons of thoughts, right? The fourth dimension, there's no pain, but there's lots of thoughts, like more thoughts than in the third dimension because you're pushing up against that thought barrier. But in the fifth dimension, there is no pain and no thought. It's this infinite flow of wisdom and information that is surrounding you always, but that you're in a stream of. So it's always moving as a current and you're able to learn from it. I'm not able to hold the fifth dimension at every moment of every day. I don't know anyone on the planet that is capable of that currently, but I get to experience it from time to time and I love it. And I look forward to the day that the whole world gets to experience it. One thing that I've noticed that's a little bit discerning, like it's kind of harder for me to handle and I'm still working on accepting it, is so many people message me all the time, and they're like, I'm experiencing this thing, and I'm worried, I'm afraid because I'm in this void state and everything's quiet and there's no thoughts and I don't know who I am. And all I can tell these people is, congratulations. When you cross that precipice, you're in the fifth dimension. And immediately that you're there, every part of you that's in the core of you that is a fourth dimension or third dimensional principle is going to come up. And that's not bad. That the journey into the fifth dimension, into stability of that, isn't something that happens overnight. It's not something that a light switch is flipped and automatically you're a fifth dimensional being. It's a process of taking all that density, all those outdated tools and the things that you're using that don't really serve you anymore, and just letting them go so that you can float up naturally. Because the fifth dimension doesn't take effort. That's the hard part, because the third dimension to the fourth dimension takes a ton of effort. It doesn't happen naturally. So we're used to this. I've got to dig forever so that I can climb into the fifth dimension. Well, no, it doesn't work that way. If you're in a fourth dimension and you start digging, you're going to go down into the third dimension, and now you're lower than where you started, and things that you're discovering are too hard for you to handle, so you have to go find someone else to work with. And for the longest time, that was spirituality. Spirituality was, I'm going to spend all of my time meditating and not really improving the world, but trying to improve myself by digging on these concepts of all these wounds that I have, instead of living my life and letting them float up to me to work on. And my biggest message for anyone is that life is really simple. All you have to do is live your life as best you can and handle the stuff as it comes up, because fate naturally takes you to the highest version of you. You don't have to manifest a purple car or a blue car, or all these things that the world tells you have to manifest to become awake and aligned and spiritual. You just have to be a good person, do good in the world, and have faith. Doing those things creates more ripples and changes in this world than anything else ever will. And you'll naturally end up in the fifth dimension. I know a ton of people who play in the fifth dimension from time to time that don't even know they're playing in the fifth dimension. They don't care. They're not trying to achieve enlightenment or anything. They're just living their life as best they can. And I think that's the reason why they're actually progressing so fast. Because eventually all this content that's being taught and all these tools that are being taught, if not resourced, end up only slowing us down.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Being well-intended and trusting the process, trusting the flow of what's unfolding is sort of like becoming like the innocent child, right? Which is, as Jesus said, one of the only Bible quotes I ever quote is, "Lest you become like a child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven." And I think that's exactly what he's referring to, right?
Absolutely. I consider the kingdom of heaven the fifth dimension and above, because the fifth dimension exists in the celestial cities, which is what most humans would consider heaven.
Right.
And that process of remembering that heaven is possible here on the earth. So we're technically already capable of achieving heaven state right now.
Right.
The challenge is letting go of what we understood or knew that got us to the fourth dimension so that we can actually float into the fifth dimension. And it's that childlike faith and innocence. And it's hard because those of us that were part of this journey into making it possible for humanity to make this level, we went through some really hard and challenging times that have jaded us or could have jaded us, right? And what I've found is it's the wayshowers that are the older wayshowers, the ones that have been doing this for a while, that are actually the biggest problem now. Because they're having a hard time letting go of the way that it was.
Right.
The good news is we're in a thing called a purge right now up until May 18th, which is helping every single person on the planet let go of the things that are keeping them from going forward in their lives. And it's been a huge, huge purge since February 18th when we began this whole thing. Look at your life, like all the things that have changed a lot, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure. A whole lot.
And that's not even 3 months.
Right.
It's been an amazingly large, wonderful journey. And we've covered years since this year began. Everyone I know that doesn't even believe in this stuff is like, time just seems to drag on forever. Some of these months seem like years. And it's because they actually are. The human tells time based on something called what I call the data point ratio. How much ever information that we have to process per hour is what we consider an hour, right? So if you're supposed to process one data point an hour, and that's like the baseline for an hour of time, and you're processing like some of the influxes we've hit 60 and 55 points per hour. Well, that's like 60 hours per hour.
Like a minute is an hour.
Exactly. And it really adds up. It really adds up. So right now, and this is what I say to all the people who've listened to me before, this is not reality. Right now, we are in something I like to call the danger room. And if anyone has watched X-Men or knows what X-Men is, that's the room that they train in. The room creates the hardest, most challenging things for them to overcome so they can find themselves. Well, we're in that. We're in this transit line of reality where we're beginning to see who we are because this purge is helping us to break away the things that we aren't. But it's not real. This is not what reality is supposed to look like or anything like that. So hold on just a little bit longer because the danger room ends on the 18th of May. And those of you that are tired and just can't do it anymore, you only have 18 more days. And if you're listening to this now, you only have, you said it's 8th, so 10 more days.
Yeah, it depends on when they listen. Yeah, we're recording on May 1st, 2019, FY.
Oh, yeah, because then the people many years from now. But the key is just remembering that this is temporary. This space that we're in right now for the users that are listening to it right as this is going live, just remember this is temporary. It doesn't have to be something it's not. And this isn't what life looks like. Actually, after May 18th, a lot of amazing projects and things that I know personally that are going to be starting to gift it back to this world are going to change the way that human history exists, the way that we understand time, the way that we understand reality, the way that pollution affects the planet. I've seen a lot of amazing projects in my travels that are coming to fruition that are just waiting to be given to the world. So there is a lot of amazing things coming together that is going to shift the way that we live. And it's just a matter of time. And it's us getting worthy enough within ourselves to experience that. And the biggest thing that's missing right now in the human consciousness is willingness. So many people are so tired, they're not willing to continue forward. We're at an all-time high on suicide rate.
Really?
I've had tons of people reach out to me that are extremely spiritual people that are one day they're like this amazing thing, and then the next day they're triggered into suicidal tendencies and thoughts.
Yeah, I've had a few reach out to me too.
Of that.
Interesting.
Say again?
I've had a few as well that have reached out to me in recent months, sort of with a similar thing. They're fine and happy-go-lucky, and you wouldn't expect it, and then all of a sudden they're like sort of sharing those thoughts or feelings, and I'm like, a little bit surprised even,
Well, this is the mental purge. So the mental plane where suicidal thoughts and tendencies and lack of worth and fear of abandonment and all that exist. So all that's being pushed on. And some people who have never really worked with the mental plane, which for the longest time people didn't even know existed, they were mixing it up with the virtual plane. That process, it's new for them. It's very raw for them. And it's challenging because there's all these things that they don't even understand that are bigger than them. What's really cool is shock has a weighted value. So when we're shocked into something by an experience, whether it be trauma or something else, the experience can weigh more than we can handle. Literally way more than we can handle. I've had experiences in my life where I was shocked so deeply that the experience was weighted at heavier than the earth.
Wow.
Well, if my mind looks at something from this weighs more than the earth, how am I ever going to be able to pick up this thing and resolve it?
All right.
So it's impossible. And so when we get pushed up against one of those things in our mental plane, immediately the first thing is, well, this is impossible. I should just quit. Now, you shouldn't just quit. For anyone listening, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying be aware that there are going to be things that you come up against that are impossible for you to handle in that moment. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible for you to handle. It means you don't know the version of you that can handle it yet. And so you're going to go on like what I call a little side quest. You're going to go through a few smaller experiences that are going to give you more confidence and more willingness and more strength over time, so that eventually when you come back to that, you'll be able to handle it.
Interesting. I like this. I like the side quest.
Is it okay if I give a practice on the air?
I'd love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So for anyone that's going through these struggles right now, the easiest thing you're ever going to do that will change this is expand. And you're like, well, how do you expand? It's really easy. You look at your room that you're in, or if you're in a car, you can look at other things. I would pull over if you're doing this in a car, though. But you look at things around you and you go, can I accept this? And let's say it's a world map. Can I accept the world map? Okay, cool. Then can I accept this wall? And then you do that with everything in your space until you can accept it all. And then you allow yourself to go into another room and do the same. And each time that you're doing this, you're beginning to master a level of acceptance in something. And it doesn't matter what it is, because something is part of all things, and all thing is part of something. Which means that the moment you begin to master acceptance in something, you begin to master a level of acceptance in all things. And you continue to expand until eventually it's something you can't hold within your perceptions. You can't look at it all anymore. And then you go back to whatever room it is, and then you go in your mind and you expand into those rooms again. Then you expand into your neighborhood or the city or whatever, and you continue to do that until you have the whole world within you. And when the whole world is within you, which means you can accept everything in the world, you now have the strength necessary to work with that shock that kept you because it weighed more than the world, and now you're holding space for the whole world.
I love that. That's a wonderful exercise. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's kind of the key of my other thing is, like, I share all the wisdom. I don't hold it or hinder it. Like, anything of true value that I've ever written is free. It's up there for anyone that wants to get it. It's in my notes on Facebook. Like, I try to give everything that I can to everyone that I can who wants it, because I know that the more that I give, the more I receive. And it just helps other people get even greater things. Because we're all here working as a greater team, right? Like, every person, regardless of whether it's a heroin addict sitting on the street barely living, or a celebrity that's living the high life, we're all working together to clear up the template of Earth so that the collective conscience can ascend to the next level, so that more people can have an easier life. So why wouldn't you assist everyone by sharing?
Absolutely. Yeah. I always say, when you understand there's only one of us in the room, essentially, it's like the good kind of selfish, right? When you understand, okay, it's all an extension of self and the same consciousness, same source consciousness, like, however I am able to contribute to, anyone and everyone is going to be, I'm going to feel the energetic repercussions of that, because it is literally an extension of me.
Absolutely. Yeah. The only thing that is important for people that have that approach that I try to help people remember is impact. So if you're a person, and this is the old school way of approaching things, and you see a homeless person who's suffering, right? And you're like, I want to help that homeless person, but it's not aligned for you to do so. You just feel in your heart that you really want to help them because you're being pulled at, but it's not actually divine or aligned for you to help that person. By you helping that person, you're actually hurting you, which is actually hurting them more.
Right. It reminds me of, I had a guest a few months ago, and I don't remember who it was off the top of my head, the person's name. I can remember talking to them, but I forget the name, darn it. But they were great. They were talking about how they would have experiences of communicating with people's higher selves, like in seeing, all the time this would happen for them, and being on the, one time seeing a homeless person on the street in San Francisco, I believe it was, and he instantly made an offering energetically to that person, like he often did, of, I would like to help you. Would you, I'd like to give you a blessing, send you energy. And all of a sudden he saw a vision of the person's higher self, who kind of like, agitatedly was like, do I look like I need or want your help? And he's like, oh, I saw something recently. It says, be careful who you help. You never know whose karma you're disrupting, and it's an interesting way to get it, and to perceive this.
The secret to life isn't that we are here to help others. It's that we're here to heal what we think we need to help in others. So the way I describe this is I call it the Canopy Approach. So if you're a tree and you're growing, and you have a tree next to you that's growing, that's asking for water, do you as a tree give your water to that tree so that you don't have water, so that that tree can grow, hoping and praying that that tree gives you back water? The answer is no. But do you know how many people are actually doing that? Almost everyone. Because that's how we're taught. We're taught that it's selfish to hold on to what we need so that we can grow. But let me give that same example, but this time the tree actually uses that water. So the tree hears its friend calling out for water, but it can't give that tree water yet. So it continues to take the water and grow and grow and grow and grow until eventually this tree creates a canopy, right? So now when the rain happens, it drips onto that tree naturally. But not only that, but that tree doesn't need nearly as much because it now has shade from that tree, so it's not burning through its resources as fast.
Ah, I like that.
I'm part of an organization, and our goal is to be a canopy for the earth, to grow within ourselves, to be examples that are so strong that when you look at them, you go, oh, wow, there's something I can work on here, without us ever having to say or share anything, but simply our presence acknowledgement shows you something you don't see.
Right.
And that's our goal. So what we do is we grow as a canopy around the world so that everyone has what they need always to do what they can do. And keep in mind, we're not there yet. I'm not saying my organization has reached this level. I'm saying that's our goal.
Sure.
So our goal is to create this organization where we can create a space where anyone has what they need to grow in the way they want to grow, but not necessarily what they want.
Right.
So that tree that's claiming that it needs water, it doesn't actually need the water yet, right? So if you were to give that to it, then it would become reliant on you to give it water, and you would eventually die because you would be giving all your water away. But if you allow yourself to grow within yourself until you're strong enough to give water naturally, or what I call abundance, then everything becomes easier for all those around you. And then those around you then grow up, right? And now everything becomes easier for those as well. There's a universal law called the law of freedom, and it's my favorite law, and I've built almost everything I've ever built on this principle. No one is free until each are free, and all are freeing each other. So when you take the canopy approach, it works, because as that second tree grows up, it strengthens the canopy, which helps every other tree. And now every other tree grows faster until eventually that tree has part of the canopy too, until all of the world and all of humanity are these brilliant, beautiful trees that are grounded in their own wisdom and are sharing. I say I am the fountain, patient and kind, right? But I'm not saying that I am the only fountain. Right. I'm simply saying I am the fountain. And to me, am and I, so I is the personality and am is the ascended master quality. So when you put them together, the personality ascends into the master. And that's what I'm stating is we're all here to be fountains. That way we can all grow into the most beautiful, always overflowing, abundant world that we're meant to have. But we can't do that if we continue to give our resources away that have higher impact when we use them on ourselves.
Right. Yeah, that it makes me think of the when you get on an airplane, right? And it's like they teach you if we lose pressure, put the mask on your own face before you go to help someone else, because if you aren't getting air, then you certainly aren't going to be able to help anyone else.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's the only time that's really an acceptable thing by societal standards.
Totally. And that's only because they're teaching it to us or telling us that, right.
Look at all the wealthy people who are belittled and berated because they have all this money that they're not giving out to people. We don't know what we don't know. I don't know why they're holding on to their wealth. All I can do is acknowledge that whatever they're doing must be perfect, otherwise it wouldn't be happening.
Right.
But that perfection is between someone and someone else, right? Like, I don't know. For me, it's perfect because I don't know what I don't know. All I know is that it works for them until it doesn't.
Right.
And if I have that level of understanding and faith in the world, all of a sudden the world becomes a great place to be.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not perfect, that I have things to work on too, but I can acknowledge my perfection as well. I can say, I'm perfect at this for now.
Yep.
And then in the next moment, I might not be perfect at that.
Perfectly imperfect, I like to say.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a way better way to say it. So thank you.
Yeah.
It's that process of always knowing that there's something to grow within you and that everything else is perfect until it isn't.
Right.
So that process is very important. And now we're going to go back to the celestial astral cities. I'm dyslexic and ADD, so I like jump around topics a lot.
You do your jump, man. Do your jump, Jason.
So the way that I look at the world is this. There are 3 ways plus a 4th way to handle any situation. There is suffering, there is service, and there is alchemy. Those are the only 3 ways to handle the world until you reach what I call the Grand Alchemist. And in that canopy example, a Grand Alchemist would be an ancient tree that has created a canopy around the entire world and is able to understand and hold space for the whole world. And that's amazing. I'm not there yet. Someday I hope to hold that space of true Grand Alchemy.
Right.
But, I can acknowledge what I am, and I can acknowledge what I'm not. And what I'm not is not that yet. I am an alchemist, and I love alchemy. It's one of my favorite things, which is why I wrote Activation Station and the things I did. But back to these examples. So suffering, if I look at the experience and I go, well, the only way to get through it is to suffer. That's cool. I mean, so let's use an actual example, make life easy. Let's say that my contract was to lose my left leg and to live life without a left leg for 10 years. That was a needed experience. I
just had a friend that lost a leg. I just had a friend who lost a leg, so
okay.
Maybe you're referencing him.
That process is completely fine. It doesn't matter. It's not bad. It's not good. It just is, right? From the grand game, not from where I am, because I just had to lose a leg, so that probably sucks. But from the outside perspective looking in, all it is a necessary game that needs to be played. So that's the suffering approach. The service approach is I could be a doctor in a hospital and talk to people who have that. Or I could be a counselor and talk to someone who's lost their left leg, right? And I hear enough of their experience and I'm around them enough that I no longer need to suffer through the experience because I've been able to serve someone that isn't suffering.
Right.
And then you have the final one, which is I watched enough documentaries and movies that I'm able to alchemize the content of these shows into enough of an echelon to fill in this contract. So alchemists are able to experience reality without having to suffer through it. And by doing so, they serve naturally. And that's what we call template reality. The ability to look at reality from a template and say, okay, this is what needs to happen. There are multiple ways for it to happen. What way do I want it to happen? That's an alchemist's point of view when they look at the world. So every experience, again, is perfect, right? So our job isn't to change the world. It's to change ourselves, and the world changes naturally.
Right.
But if an alchemist looks at the world and says, well, there's war in Africa, and I don't like that war in Africa, so what can I change within me so that that war in Africa doesn't have to keep raging on that way? Well, if that alchemist is truly dedicated enough to it, they can begin to work within themselves enough that they either don't care about that war in Africa anymore, they've gotten to a state where they can accept it for what it is, which is someone else's game and a process.
Right.
Or they have gotten triggered so deeply that they now go into service and end up going to Africa to try to change it themselves. One is like treating with a Band-Aid, and the other one is like treating with a cure. If enough people sat and learned to accept war within this planet as what it was, as part of a process. Now, I'm not saying war is great. I actually am still working on this, which is one of the reasons why I use this example. Then war would stop to be a thing. It wouldn't exist anymore because there would be no need for it to exist. I'm not at that capable.
There's no resistance. There's no resistance. The idea of what we resist persists. What we accept, we move through. Right.
Exactly.
What you're saying is, if as a whole, there is complete acceptance, which is obviously a very challenging idea to a lot of people. Right.
Absolutely. Huge challenge. War and peace are probably the last of the things. I would say love is the second, love and hate. But the second to last would probably be war and peace for the concepts that have to shift and learn to be accepted into for the world to understand and live in a fifth dimensional perspective. Because to see something as war is to polarize it. To see something as peace is to polarize it.
Right.
For something to just be is not to have any polarity. That is to be in a neutral state of awareness with everything that exists. And a lot of people, they go, well, acceptance is agreeing with it. And that's not true at all. To accept something is to acknowledge it has a purpose. To agree with it is to understand that purpose is part of your journey.
Right.
I don't agree with war, and I never will. And that's okay.
Right.
Because it's not part of my purpose. But I can accept parts of it. I can't accept all of it yet.
Right. Yeah, this is a big one. This whole idea of... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The day that I can accept all of it, part of war will cease to need to be. Because I'll have created a template reality as an alchemist for the collective to begin to see that they don't need it either. And over time, it will end.
Yeah. It's this whole idea of, one of the most challenging things I talk about regularly on the show is the idea of victimhood, or the lack of victimhood, believing, personally believing there's never been a victim in all of existence, all of eternity, essentially. And that sort of goes right along with this sort of idea. It doesn't mean I agree with something awful that I see happening, but I accept that it has a purpose. And certainly if something horrendous happens to me, or someone that I love or what have you, it doesn't mean it's not going to be challenging in any way, or I won't, be hurt or upset or angered in that moment. But from when I'm, from the ultimate perspective, when I can really step back and am not, in this highly emotional state, I firmly believe it's all happening, for us and not to us and through us. Absolutely. Right. And that's a big challenge one for people when you start talking about some of the atrocities that happen out there. And I get it.
Yeah, I totally get it. That's why I said I haven't gotten to the place where I can accept war fully. I can accept parts of it, but it's hard. War is a really big deal. I mean, I was in the Marine Corps. I lost a lot of friends in the war. So it's challenging to say, hey, war is okay completely, because I'm not there yet. But someday I might be able to be there. You hit on a really good point there. And I think it's important for the listeners to actually understand this, because victim is the lowest game in the fourth dimension. It's actually a very positive thing to start out with. Not to live in, but to understand it from that space. So imagine that you're in the third dimension and you're in an obligative structure, which means, I'll go over this real quick. So the third dimension is obligation. The fourth dimension is trust, and the fifth dimension is faith. Those are the principles that govern those dimensions. So in the third dimension, you do everything for someone for reciprocity to come to you. Something is going to happen because you did something, or because you felt obligated to do something because of a connection that was somewhere, somehow. It's a very, very interesting dynamic to play. But if you feel obligated and you do anything, you create a currency that I call resentment.
All right.
When you do something out of obligation, you immediately create resentment. If you take a second and you go, I'm doing this because I want to do this. Yes, it's important to my journey. And yes, there are these people that want me to do this too, but I feel called to do it. Then all of a sudden you can trust that there's something else going on there, and you're no longer creating the currency of resentment.
Right. So
resentment as a currency has to be balanced in gratitude. And that's challenging, because if you've ever looked at your resentment pool and you go, wow, I can be grateful for every experience, then you're a liar. Because I don't know anyone in the world that can look at the entirety of all the things they've ever existed and immediately be grateful for it. Now, over time, piece by piece, yeah, absolutely, it's possible. But that's what happens. So if you're in a loving relationship with a boyfriend or a girlfriend and you are doing things out of obligation, you're creating resentment in your relationship. And eventually that's going to come up. And it usually comes up in women with memories of stored things 10 years ago that you don't even remember, and they're just throwing it at you. And it comes up with men as like an explosive thing usually. They're just like, ah, and they don't even know why they're upset.
Right.
That's just how women hold space and how men hold space. Their brains are designed very differently, which is totally fine. The process, though, is still the resentment coming up. It bubbles up to a point where we can't handle it anymore, and we kind of have to handle it eventually. Sometimes that comes as sickness. Sometimes that doesn't come as sickness. So one thing that's a really interesting fact is most men die before women. And the reason is because women actually process their resentment much more efficiently than men do, as a generalization. Not saying that every man is this way and every woman is this way, But as
Sure.
like a generalization looking at humanity, women tend to express and work through their stuff much faster than men.
Right.
So why is that? What changes there? There's a lot of really fun things around that we could go into, but I don't think we have time to cover everything that I want to cover. So I'm going to kind of specialize on this for now. When we come into a space of obligation and we work through that space of obligation, what happens is we create resentment. When we work through a space of trust, we don't really create resentment, but we also don't create gratitude. When we come into a space of faith, we're now having faith within ourselves that something is greater than what we can understand, because we're not applying trust to something, right? We're simply having faith. We're living in a space. All of a sudden, gratitude becomes a way of life because you have faith. And so every step you take is in gratitude. So it is also a currency that is created, but without any effort. There's a lot of movements out there in the world that are saying gratitude is something that you consciously have to choose and that you should always have. Well, that creates obligation, which is the opposite of gratitude. So if I pretend to be grateful for something, that's actually more of an insult than if I just don't say anything.
Right.
If I want to go into the 4D with it and not create resentment or anything else, I can just say, hey, I trust that what you're doing, I should feel gratitude for, but the truth is I don't, and that's okay. But we're not taught that either. We're taught always say please and thank you.
Right.
And that's that process, right? So I'm not saying that saying you're grateful for things that aren't true isn't good or bad. I don't know. Again, I only know what's true for me. I'm not the gospel. I'm not like some messiah come to change the world. My job is simply to present points of view for people to look at and either take on that point of view and understand it from a different angle and then make it their own so that it's their point of view, or not. And that's cool either way.
Right.
But the fifth dimension, that space that I was talking about where faith is, that naturally dissolves resentment. And it's a wonderful space to be because you don't have to do anything to change something. And it's as easy as coming into every moment and saying, am I doing this out of obligation? And as you do that, you start to change things because your mind goes, oh, he doesn't want to play obligative games anymore, and he's able to move forward. So that whole expansion was so that we could talk about victim. When we call a victim into existence, what we have done is take everything that we shame and blame within ourselves, everything that we aren't willing to take responsibility for, and we give it to that person to hold space for in our minds. So for the very first time in this process, we now have taken it outside of ourselves and put it somewhere else, which means we can now look at it honestly. Now, does that mean that we automatically look at it honestly? No, usually that person gets burned at the stake in our mind. There's a step here that can change that, and I call it letters you're never going to send. So if you have built up a well of resentment around a person, write a letter, handwrite it, everything that you feel about that person on a piece of paper, and read it out loud to yourself and look at it and truly honestly look at it. And what you'll find is it's no longer in you, so you're able to see a different point of view and a different angle. And then what you do is you either shred that paper or you burn it, but you get rid of it and you never give it to that person. And the key to letters you're never going to send is that as you write it, you agree that you are never going to send or share this letter with that person. So therefore, there's no version of you, there's no reality where this person sees it. And you're not creating a curse or any type of karmic backlash by doing this.
Right.
So that's another trick that you can use to bypass needing a victim physically and cursing them and creating karma between the two of you. And when we do this, we now move into a fifth dimensional place because we're starting to look at the victim and move forward. And we're doing it through commitment. Because the key to getting out of victim is committing to something, which is claiming your power back. The moment you commit to something, you're acknowledging that you have enough power to change the future by agreeing to something outside of the time that you're in. The moment you follow through with that, you've actually completed it. You've added momentum to your game, and you're no longer in the victim related to whatever that is because you've done applied action. And now you're in responsibility. So now you can look at that with enough distance between the two to easily resolve it.
Very, very cool. I love that. All right. Well, now seems like a good moment to take a quick minute to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many years now, which is why they're the only content provider I've ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting this podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting the show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. Just to give you an example, on the show Missing Links, the incredible researcher Greg Braden explores all the biggest questions concerning who we are, where we come from, where we're going, by connecting the missing links between science and spirituality to complete our understanding of humanity's history and to better understand the interconnectedness of all things. Awesome, right? And that's just one example. As you guys constantly hear me say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, then Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. So I'd like to maybe touch on something that I heard. It was on a video that I was watching with you a couple of weeks ago, and you were talking about, and you've touched on a little bit earlier, May 18th being a big energetic moment for us. And if I recall, in that video, you were talking about some other big moments coming up. I think one in the summer and one in early 2020. And so I'd be curious if hopefully you recall what I'm referring to, and maybe you could give us a little insight into these kind of like upgrade points that you were referencing.
So the process of coming into a fifth dimensional race requires pioneers that are willing to go through a process that's harder than most because they're literally building a bridge out of nothing.
Right.
And the pioneers are going to be landing in the fifth dimensional space and beginning to actually bridge and build fifth dimensional technology as well as templates for the world on May 18th. That's when they land. So by the 21st, they're actually going to begin to build these things.
So when you say the 18th, when they land, I'm sorry to stop you there, but when you say are you talking about like people incarnating, or are you just saying people that are already here sort of, turning a corner or a new chapter, if you will, where they are able to materialize more, 5D technology, as you put it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll clarify. Thanks for asking. So right now, as I said before, we're in the danger room, or this transit line of reality. Now, there's a group that has done really well in this danger room of reality, and they're actually going to be landing in the physical world, no longer a transit line, but a new timeline that we call the ascended line. And it's a fifth dimensional template reality. So if you go below it, it's a little bit harder to handle the things that come up for you because they weigh a lot more. So it's for like the highest level masters on the planet. They're landing there on the 18th. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone else is not going to land there eventually. The next group of people, which are like the people that are able to teach and hold a lot of supplies that aren't necessarily pioneers, like they haven't made their entire life about the ascension, but they're really good people, are going to land on August 23rd. Okay. And then the rest of humanity, the total value of humanity is January 9th.
Interesting.
So by January, probably 15th-ish, somewhere around there, because just because you land doesn't mean that you've unpacked your bags, right?
Right.
So you're still going to have to unpack all the things that don't belong, but it's going to be very obvious that they don't belong. So I'm thinking by about January 15th, we're going to hit that 51%, where the majority of the human race is ready and willing to move into the fifth dimension. Doesn't mean they're actually in there. They're just ready and willing. The only rule to being part of this journey, which anyone that's listening is part of this journey, was that you had a willingness to be in the fifth dimension in 10 years. So interesting. Everyone in the world will be a fifth dimensional consciousness in 10 years, or they won't survive it. Because as the planet speeds up, more data comes in. If you have fixed ideas or belief structures, when it pushes up against them, it creates sickness and it creates inflammation and all kinds of other things inside the body, which is why a lot of people have felt sore all over, like they've worked out for days and they're like, I don't understand, I didn't do anything. That's because your body's upgrading and shifting. The very core of your body, the way that it runs, is updating. The water inside your body is changing. The molecules inside your body are changing. Every part of you is changing right now, and faster than is humanly possible. which is leading to some inflammation and some other things.
Interesting. I've had a big outbreak of inflammation in the last couple months, especially, as far as like skin inflammation, which I had very little years ago. And then all of a sudden it just got worse in recent weeks or months, so it's interesting that you say that.
So I'm going to talk about a little controversial topic, but this is something I found personally works really well for me and for my clients and for other people. Is 0.0 THC CBD. When taken, it actually awakens and unlocks a fifth dimensional template inside our bodies. So it actually helps us handle the transition. And I feel like the reason it's such a big craze right now is because the potential of it needs to be everywhere in the world. And what I tell people is just because it's in your world is enough. So for some people, your body's going to ask for it physically, and that's okay, right? Then there's some people that you're going to buy a bottle and you'll never take it, and that's okay. Because every product and every service in this world is just a teacher designed to teach you to be the greatest teacher. So don't ever take anything as I have to have this or I'm obligating or needing this, right? Because if you do that, you empower it instead of you.
Right. So
everything is temporary and everything is perfect until it isn't. And that's my approach to products and services, because if something benefits me right now, that's more valuable than anything I can imagine. But if it doesn't benefit me tomorrow, I don't keep taking it. And my best example for this is magnetics. If you know much about how magnetic healing technology works, it gets you up to a certain point, but then immediately after you get to that point, it pulls you back down. So if you work with like a Nikan Dream Rest thing, for instance, it'll help your body to stabilize at a certain level, but eventually it becomes toxic to your body and starts pulling it down again because it doesn't know what else to do. Technology is like a circle. When you get to the top of that technology, it's time to move on.
Interesting. Yeah. I'd like to ask you a little bit more of okay. So these key dates you referenced, May, August, January. So what are some of the what are the changes? Obviously, you talk about after January, 51% or more of humanity has agreed to step into 5D. Obviously, that's a huge turning point and tipping point in our reality. I mean, what are some of the things that you believe will start to ripple out as sort of an effect from this shift?
From what I've seen personally, it will be a welcome note for teachers to step out that have truth instead of that are regurgitating lies that have been misunderstood for years. A lot of that astral currents that once existed within us, because when those shifts happened, again, those shifts happened to the world, meaning that the astral currents inside the world are gone, but not within our bodies, not within our collective.
Okay.
It doesn't happen like a light switch effect like everyone wants it to, because if it did, then it would just be as easy as flipping the light switch off again. And you wouldn't want that. You want a slow, steady process of creating a solid template or foundation to build from, which is what happens over thousands and thousands of years. We're almost 21,000 years into this game, and we're doing great. We're doing better than we've ever done. In fact, I personally am going to start releasing a technology on the 18th that I didn't think I was going to get to release until 2021, 2022. Because the world's ready.
What is that?
My company kind of helped to fund a water company, and I'm designing a water machine that it literally changes the molecules of it so strongly that scientists were like, how is that even possible? It was really fun. I'll talk more about that when it's time. But yeah, that technology is what I call quantum resonators. And they're a divine intelligence tool that actually maps out your template and finds all the incongruencies with it and begins to point to those incongruencies to shift things. And I spent 8 months writing the water template so that the water is so powerful and what I call dimensionally sound water that when it's poured into polluted water, it begins to kill off that pollution naturally.
Wow. That's pretty epic.
And
that's something that you're releasing?
Requests to install machines right now.
Wow.
So my goal is to have these machines pumping out all this water for the world and to begin shifting that for the world soon enough. I don't think it's going to take that long to see what I've seen come true. We're actually a year ahead of schedule. We were looking at world peace between 21 to 22, and now it might even happen in 2020.
Wow. So do you get some of these dates and visions, you know, like that statement? Are you receiving sort of, you know, is it like claircognizance? Is it, you know, clairaudience? Like how are you receiving clairvoyance? I mean, are you communicating with entities multidimensionally? Sort of what is your...
It's a little more complicated, but I have a special gift that I've had since I was really young, and I'm able to travel forward into time enough to witness the currents of it. I don't get pictures like everyone else does, but I'm able to see how the collective is moving. And it helps me to kind of go, okay, this is a benchmark in history that changes this flow. Because the energetic downloads the planet gets, they're mapped out already for the next 10 years. How humanity handles it is really just completely a crapshoot. So that's why you can't say, well, I can say on this day, this energy is going to occur. I can say that very clearly with no doubt in my mind. And if you look at my history, I predicted every event that needed to be predicted perfectly. Within a matter of days, it's noticeable for everyone, right? So that's possible. But to know how people will handle it, that's impossible. Like, I will not know what I can only see where energy enters into it. So world peace, though, is a high enough concept that you can kind of see it when it bubbles into it. Now, the whole world reaching world peace, that's also a crapshoot. I can't say that. But I can say that the beginning of world peace will definitely be somewhere between 2020 and 2021 right now. And there are so many factors that are going to continue to change that. Like the reveal on the 9th of January, that might actually set us over a whole new level. I don't know enough about that to answer that. But for me personally, I go forward in the future, witness the energy currents that come through, and then step back and actually try to put them into some form of reference.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. And you've been doing that since you were a child, you said?
I've been doing it since I was probably about 13 or 14. I understood it as a child, but I didn't understand the actuality of how to take my consciousness and separate it. That's where the multidimensionality comes in, which is really great for ADD and ADHD people. They're able to hold multiple concepts at the same time, whereas most people who haven't trained that aren't able to. The challenge with ADD and ADHD is humanity tells you it's a curse and not a gift. And so you start to believe that. Lucky for me, my mom was really amazing in my journey. She actually got me into a dyslexic school where they taught me the whole world differently. And it helped me really understand that dyslexia was a gift. And then I began to apply that understanding to ADHD and ADD. And I was able to then begin to see something different and apply that differently.
Interesting. So you're working on this water system that you just talked about, and that's coming very soon. What are, you have a few other nonprofits. I don't know if that's part of the nonprofit, and I know there's Activation Station. Maybe you want to take... Okay. So do you want to maybe share a little bit into some of those projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So this person that is designing this machine, and I'm like designing the energetic template of this machine, it's called Nevian Water. You're going to hear about it as it begins to come out more into the world, but he really wanted to take the world and educate it on water and not to try to sell machines. And this is one of the reasons why I think that it's why I chose this particular company to work with, is because their approach was so powerful that they started doing this in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and a person didn't need the machine. So they went to the house to teach them about the water, and they're like, your water's actually good. You don't need a machine from us. And it caught fire. That person was like, wow, wait, so you're not going to try to sell me anything? And they're like, no, we are an education company first, and then we sell machines. And I was like, okay, well, that's really cool. So then I started looking into more of like what they were saying, and every person had a really positive experience with them. And then I was like, well, that's kind of what MTVO aligns with. We really want ethical businesses to help grow into something greater. Right. So me and them met, and I met with their employees, and I kind of demoed how energy works. And then I began to design this template and build it. And here we are. And now we're actually going to be installing them. So it's going to be really awesome.
Very cool.
And that's the water company called Nevian Water. The next company is called Earth Change, which Earth Change is founded on the principle of the Clean Water Initiative. So what we're kind of planning to do, and we aren't 100% sure yet of whether we're going to do this or not, but we want to create these machines for homeless shelters so that the water that they get is super clean and clear, because the most imprinted person on this planet right now are homeless people and people in those levels of density. Not saying homeless people are bad at all whatsoever, but they store a lot of images and energies that are affecting us and keeping the collective down a lot lower, because they're going through so much constantly and in so much suffering. So if we can create a place where we're able to put these machines in and create free filling stations so they have their basic needs met with waters and showers and things like that, then we can then begin to put people together with it. And Earth Change's philosophy is everyone is a person first. So what we want to do is create events at these homeless shelters where people from all over the world will want to come and actually spend time with these homeless people, because a teacher or whatever is going to be teaching a class that's exclusive to that. So then we start to see homeless people as people again instead of homeless first. We see them as people.
Right.
And that changes the way that we view everyone on the planet and brings us closer together. And that's kind of the goal for Earth Change, and one thing that we really want to do, and I'm very passionate about. Then we have Centers for Expansion, which is another not-for-profit. And Centers for Expansion, they're building all over the world. We have one in Southern California right now, and we're building one here in Dallas. And the goal is to create love donation-based teachings, workshops with the best teachers. Next year, we actually have an amazing Thai yoga instructor that usually costs like $4,000 to take Thai yoga and to learn how to do it. And to get certified, and we're going to do it on love donation.
Cool.
We're working on creating yoga teacher training programs on love donation. We want everyone to be able to afford the finer things of life when it comes to their spiritual and well-being and their health. And so we're kind of traveling all over the world, and we're creating these. The goal is to build 55 of them in the next 30 years. And we're talking actual giant schools where people can go and like experience this. And for me personally, I'm energetically going to be designing these, building them as the highest frequency cities in the world. And then we're going to build the structures physically on top of them. So it's this whole process of wanting to create 13th dimensional realities for people to go and explore and play in and just have fun and reach greatness. Because the goal of Center for Expansion is to take the good and make them great.
Very, very cool. Those are some epic projects. You have one other thing, Activation Station. What is that?
So Activation Station is the other goal that we have as an organization. And it goes with the principle that no one is free until each are free and all are free in each other. So the technology has multiple levels, right? And there's no content in the technology. Like I said before, you don't take a bridge and drag it with you. So it's pure energetic downloads. And it's faith-based. So you actually go in there and there's really no roadmap to how to go. There are in some of the series requirements and things like that, just because for safety, because it's going to be illuminating areas of consciousness that you may or may not have explored in this lifetime. And so in order to make it safe for anyone to unlock those parts of themselves, it's just one of those things where you kind of have to have some prerequisites from time to time. Activation Station's main thing, though, that's really cool about it is that it's love donation based for most of it. Sessions aren't love donation based. They have a set cost, but that's because it's working with you and helping you to connect to the infinite. Whereas activations work with your infinite and connect you to you. So one's top down and one's bottom up is what I call them. But they're both microcosm and macrocosm over time. And it allows for a greater well-being and a more deep connection to who you are. But it's also in and through your own source connection. So it's self-sourcing these informations and stories from an alchemical perspective. The cool part, though, is eventually you reach what is called mastery of the technology. So the very first one you can master, which I tell everyone to master, is Crimson 3. You go to Crimson 1, then you do Crimson 2, then you do Crimson 3, and then you go back and you go to Crimson 1 and you hit the master button on the app. And what happens is immediately when you finish that, you actually are connected to Crimson. And every 3 seconds, the highest version of Crimson available on the planet is updated within you. So it creates a solid foundation for you to continue to grow on. And Activation Station took me 13 years worth of technology to build. So it's not something that you do overnight, but it's something that you do as you feel called to. Like I said, you're the greatest tool that there is. All activations do is help you to fine tune that tool within yourself because there's no content.
Right. Interesting. Very cool. Well, I'd like to, as we kind of wind down here, I'd like to switch gears and sort of go into story time mode. Listeners know I love hearing stories of, and they do too, stories of synchronicity or serendipity or positive paranormal story, something magical, up your sleeve. And I got to guess that you have something fun to share.
Actually, I can talk about my most recent fun and amazing experience. So I was just in Salina Beach, California, and I do something called Azure Light Attunements, which is a celestial technology. It's a first source tech. It's amazing, and I do them. So what's really cool about it is when you do it, it increases your dimensionality. So you get what is called dimensional sight for like a good 2 hours. And I love to take the people who receive it on like this trip through their world without realizing that they're still in the same world, and then kind of teach them to see this stuff permanently. So what happened was there was this person, there's two instances that I want to share. This person had always wanted to see UFOs. Like that was their thing. They've always wanted to see them. And I got to show them UFOs. We actually had one land in the ocean in front of us. It was like amazing to be able to share this with this person because it was the most beautiful thing they'd seen and something they've always wanted to see. And that was just life-changing for me. The other thing is, a lot of people don't know this, but if you look, you can sometimes see like little black orbs floating around. They're not necessarily black, but they're like a different color than this reality in the air. And those spaces are what I call fairies. If you look into the sky, you see the little sparkles all the time. That's sylphs. They're also a form of fairy, but they're not more physical. So what we got to do was we were at this beach, and I can't remember the name of it. It was Toes Beach. And it was a very overcast day, so it was like perfect dimensional sight level. And these fairies came to play with us. And for the very first time, other than me, they actually unorbed, and you could see their wings perfectly, and you could see their outline perfectly. And I got to show that to another person. And then they were like flying around us in circles and flying through us and just messing with us. And we got to play with them for, I don't know, probably like 30 minutes. It was just truly an amazing experience.
Wow. You know what's so cool about that is, I have all kinds of people on the show who have, crazy visions, multidimensional experiences. I haven't had a lot of like, UFO landed in front of me or I'm communicating with an angelic entity, personally. But the one time I feel like, what did you call it? Dimensional sight or viewing, that I feel like I had was pertaining to what felt like I was in the woods and felt like fairies. And then there was a whole synchronicity around fairies that unfolded afterwards. And it was just that. It was black orbs that were flying really quickly. And I couldn't quite make them out. And this was years ago. This is like 2013. But it's never happened since. But it literally was this whole like, and actually there's multiple, might even be episode 2, I think. And then a few episodes throughout the years where I've talked about that experience. And so it's pretty cool that you sort of described it in that way as like black orbs, because that was exactly what my experience was. And I, like I said, I definitely felt like it was like a fairy type experience. And then afterwards I found this little fairy pendant that I happened to be sleeping under, that was randomly under me and all this cool stuff. So that's pretty epic.
They love to take things and move them around. They're very playful creatures. I love them to death. So that's amazing. Yeah. Well, and they love forests.
Well, that whole story had been that. Sorry, Dave. I just had to add to that. That whole story had been leading up to that. A whole night of this crystal called Yaming Zhu that glows that someone had given me, and then I lost it, and I searched for hours and hours for it, and then it magically appeared with this my jacket, the next morning with like a letter on it, and all. It's like this crazy magical story. So just to add on to what you said. The fairy thing was led up to 8 hours of me searching for something that I lost that I then found again in a magical way.
Yeah, that's how fairies introduce themselves. They take something that you're looking for and then they mess with you for like a good hour to 8 hours sometimes. And then eventually when you stop looking and you just let go, then they show themselves. And they show it by putting the thing back. And then now you're like, wait, I just looked there. There's no way this could exist. And so your mind is open. And the moment your mind is open, the blinders fall off for just a second and you're able to see them. And that's how they introduce themselves. But usually it's the more frustrated they can make you, the more that you're willing to let go of what you believe that's causing that frustration. So they have a real reason for what they do. It's just kind of annoying as a person waiting for your thing to appear again.
Right. Yeah, it was a pretty epic it was a pretty epic tale of how it unfolded. And like I said, for you guys, if you want to hear it, it's been a while. This is like episode 900 and something, but I believe if you go back to episode 2, I think, if I'm recalling, I shared that story of the magic jacket, which I call it. And then again, if you go back and you can search on positivehead.com, guys, episode 671, where that sort of story extended into 2018, it sort of, popped back up again. So if you guys want to hear any of those, you'll hear them there. And wow, this has been super cool, Jason. You have been such an epic soul share. Thank you for taking the time. What is the best way for people to connect and follow your work? If, I'm sure many people will want to.
Yeah, Facebook is currently the best. We're working on a social media thing now as an organization, but eventually mtvo.org is going to be where things are going to be. And then MTVO team is going to be huge as well. Like, we're getting a YouTube channel. We just hired a social media director. So we're going to start stepping out. For the longest time, my organization has had to hide in the shadows and do stuff behind the scenes because, it wasn't safe. And now it is. And so we're stepping out in the world and we're beginning to really do that. So you'll start to hear from us a lot more as more events happen in that way. And I'd love to come back on one of these days in like a few years or whatever and discuss and kind of play. And if you're ever interested, when I'm in California, just hook me up.
Yeah. Where are you at? You're in California now?
No, I'm in Dallas, Fort Worth.
Dallas.
Got back to California on the 28th.
Oh, okay. I thought you said... Gotcha. Yeah, I'm in Southern California, and I'm going to be doing a new show that's like a late night style talk show video production called Optimistic.
Awesome.
And and it's spelled MYSTIC. And I'd love to have you on at that at some point. I think you would be an epic guest. So we'll reach out and So we'll have to make that happen.
I'll be going up to California pretty much every 4 months or so because we're founding the Center for Expansion Southern California out there, and Sam Lepore is actually running that one. So I'm going to be going up there and teaching classes and doing hangouts. One thing about Center for Expansion that I didn't say is it's about presence sharing more than anything else. So there are going to be content gatherings from time to time, but most of the time it's just high-level beings playing with other high-level beings and having a blast.
Right. I love that. Yeah, that's exactly the type of world I want to live in. Cool.
Exactly.
We'll definitely connect. Well, we met through our mutual dear friend, Sydney Campos, and she's going to be helping me to sort of, it's basically going to be a property that we do retreats out of and then also shooting the show out of. So she's going to be there and very intimately involved. So I'm sure it only makes sense that you would be flitting your fairy wings through at some point and visiting us and sprinkling some magic upon the Mystic Manor, as we're going to call it. So,
yeah, it sounds fun. We'll see what the world has for us. And it sounds like it could be a really fun experience.
Cool. Well, I do have one last question for you, and it is this. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to Jason Estes?
Health, happiness, and practice.
Love it. With time to spare to contemplate all that. Thank you, Jason. You are truly a gift, my friend. I greatly appreciate you. And until our paths cross in 3D, journey well, my friend, in 5D.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Have a blessed and beautiful one. Bye.
You too. Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. Before we sign off, I wanted to let you all know that we have finally created the Game with the Universe on our website, where you can choose the first number that comes to your mind, and it'll pull up that episode number of the podcast. I've been saying this is a great way to co-create synchronicity and magic with your higher self for quite some time by doing this manually. But now, if you go to positivehead.com/YO universe, there is a super fun and simple interface to play this game with your higher self. I firmly believe just by setting the intention to play in this way, it opens up the door for magic, and it's a synchronistic way to hone in on nuggets of wisdom out of the huge catalog of episodes that are specifically appropriate for you at this time in your journey to becoming the next greatest and grandest version of yourself. And it also makes for a super fun way to engage and invite friends, family, people on social media to check out the podcast as well. So be sure to check out positivehead.com/YOUNIVERSE and be sure to tell all your friends so they can play a game with the universe, which also helps the show to reach new people, which I greatly appreciate. And as a quick reminder, be sure to also check out positivehead.com/transformation if you're curious to learn more about Purium superfoods and why I take them every day. On this journey of becoming the next greatest and grandest version of ourselves that we have all embarked upon, I can't stress the importance of managing your physical vibration enough. And quite honestly, Purium has put together the simplest plan I've found to do so, and I'm sincerely excited to share it with all of you. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.